People who've been on home renovation or remake shows. How's the house holding up? Plumbing and remodeling company I work for did plumbing for an HGTV show about 10 years ago. We did the hookups for the new laundry room. The homeowners picked some fancy Moroccan tile for the floors at some upscale New York City boutique, and the host of the show decided it would look better without grout, which went about as well as you'd expect. Filming wrapped, and we were called back out a few weeks later to replace the fancy tile that immediately chipped and became dangerous with some boring tile. Had to sign NDAs, etc. Story 2. My family was on a home renovation show when I was a kid, in the late 90s, early 2000s. I think it was Changing Rooms or possibly another show by the same cast and producers. It was one of those shows where they do 3 rooms in the house, and mine was one of them they decorated. It looked so pretty. They decorated it to look like a fairy woodland with huge tree murals on the walls and a night sky of stars hanging from the ceiling. But it held up really badly. All the murals on the wall peeled off and it looked bad pretty quickly. I had fun shooting the show though, and it was a cool story to tell my friends at school about. It kinda sucks that this didn't hold up that well. It sounds like it would have been awesome to have. I'm not sure what OP means by quickly though, as in like a year or two or like a few months. After 3 or 4 years or whatever, I'd be like, oh, that sucks, but whatever. If it's like 4 months, that's just a waste of time. Story 3. It's not a house, but a local place was on bar rescue a few years back. Overhauled the entire interior. I haven't seen the episode of the actual show, but the bar has softball fields at it. I went up and played softball during one of their test runs. They renamed the place Boulder Lodge. About 9 months later, they went back to their old name, but kept most of the interior designs and food/menu. It's still running and largely seems better than it was before the rescue. Yeah, I'd hope it's better than before the rescue. If it made it actively worse, that would kind of be impressive. Because don't those shows target, like, straight up dumps? Places that no one would really want to go to otherwise. Although I'm sure there's at least one person who was like, I miss the charm of it. Story 4. Remember Extreme Makeover? A show where they build or hugely remake a home for a needy person/owner? They did one here in my town, won't say for privacy, and my brother, a builder, was approached to help build a home in the dead of winter. Bro couldn't help, but our friends, the neighbors to the home, volunteered, and the home was completed in 1 week. In heavy rain and cold, they built it, and now the home has a number of problems too. The owner went back on Extreme Makeover to fix everything and was told, you got this for free, fix it yourself. Story 5. My sister's master bedroom got a makeover on a Surprise Your Spouse show. The designer was going for an Arabian Nights romantic vibe, but it ended up looking pretty weird with all the closets hidden behind yards of draped fabric. They took it all down and painted the room a neutral color within months. They also took out the ceiling fan and replaced it with a giant tree branch wired up with twinkling lights. Not too long afterwards, half the lights went out and it was too hot in the room without the fan, so that got put back as well. On the bright side, it didn't cost them anything and it was a fun experience. And they got a couple of new furniture pieces out of it, but in the end they didn't keep any of it the same. Story 6. I helped source a person for such a show after they were the victim of a rogue trader that took tens of thousands of pounds from them, leaving them with nothing left and not doing the work. I felt pretty good about myself that I was able to talk the person through what would happen, sit them down and chat over the pros and cons, and find a pathway through so they could have a habitable home and a normal family life again, especially as the family had had it rough even before the rogue trader. The renovation looked great, and there's no way the family would have been able to have gone ahead without the help and funding from the show. Funny thing is, I got a call from the person about 6 months later and they said that the TV company had been in touch and sent out another builder who redid much of the work and made it even nicer, because they since found out the guy they originally used was a cowboy builder. What I'll always remember though is the transformation in the person. The first time I met them, they were crying, shaking uncontrollably, afraid of the rogue trader and utterly desperate, with seemingly no way out. Over the course of my dealings with them, they changed to such an extent it was like a different person. They were bubbly, positive, and resilient. They were able to laugh off the issue where they had to have a second builder out, and while they were in talks with the TV people, it actually even led to a freelance job offer for them as well. They'd been at rock bottom, and this was the catalyst that turned it around, and it was totally unexpected for them. I believe it was genuinely life-changing. This was at least 10 years back now, but I'll never forget it. Hope the family's still doing well. Story 7. I stayed in a room that was made over on hotel hell. It was poorly done. The paint lines were terrible and some of it was on the ceiling. The decorations they used just seemed like really cheap stuff from TJ Maxx, not really hotel quality stuff. They didn't touch the out-of-date bathroom, but they didn't put that part on the show. The hotel also didn't keep the fancy linens in that room because I'm sure that was a pain to wash, and also just to keep track of that one special set of linens. Basically, looked great on camera, but in person did not look professionally done. Story 8. I work for one of the construction companies that was contracted to build the new house on Extreme Makeover Home Edition. This was like 10 plus years ago when the show was at the height of its popularity. Anyway, it was a huge, nice house built for a widowed mother with several kids. Father had recently died, hence why she was on the show. Even though the house was given to her, she couldn't afford it after a year or so. Property tax, electricity, water, upkeep, etc., and put it on the market. Simply owning a home of that size is very expensive and she couldn't afford it. Edit. The obvious follow-up question here that I get all the time is, what are the legalities of selling the house, especially that quickly? Does she get to keep the money from the sale? Well, my answer is, I have no idea. Story 9. Kind of in a similar vein, there was that show Gordon Ramsay does where he renovates hotels on Hotel Hell. One of the early episodes he was in Las Cruces, and I have relatives in nearby El Paso that kept me filled in since I'm a big Ramsay fan. It did not go over well for the owner following the episode. Anyway, in the episode, the lady is running a unique stay hotel into the ground with mediocre food, nothing at all like local cuisine, and bad singing like Cher that she does in the dining area. I'm not going to fault her for singing badly, but she should have realized that this was driving away customers and taken Ramsay's advice. Ramsay stayed for a week, and this was a big deal in Las Cruces, because celebrities usually aren't in West Texas or New Mexico. His show also paid as compensation for filming a major renovation with new furniture, etc. After filming, Ramsay and the company went off on their own way. And I also gotta mention this lady is disliked already in the city of Las Cruces. As for what happened after, well, a lot of things. The bar down the road did a watch party of the episode when it went live, and pulled all the works with an outdoor projector and a whole event. Rather than heed advice, the lady decided to sell off the furniture and stuff that Ramsay provided and go back to her old ways, which meant people didn't come, especially since now she was disliked even more after it was found out she did that. She eventually had to sell off the hotel entirely and skipped town. As for the head chef / cook that Ramsay was talking food trucks with in the episode, I think the dude eventually either started a taco truck of his own or is working for one, and is doing well last I heard. At least somebody gets a happy ending and all that. Story 10. It always bugs me in those shows where the go-to manufacturer drama is, well, we open up the wall and there's faulty wiring / water damage / termite damage / asbestos. And we didn't have the budget for that, so now you don't get a new master bathroom. And the homeowner responds in some, I can't believe they're trying to sabotage our home fashion. Like, no one who renovates homes for a living gets to their second renovation, let alone enough to get your own show, without learning to budget for unexpected structural or MEP issues. Story 11. This reminds me of an episode of, I think it was DIY SOS. They redid this woman's bedroom and kept referring to it as a boudoir. You ever see the film Moulin Rouge? Like that kind of setup. The woman absolutely freaking hated it. Probably one of the few times I've ever seen someone not just smile and nod at the monstrosity they made. Oh, I also heard that Pimp My Ride was a freaking scam, basically. All the LCD TVs and the really expensive crap they put in the cars, oh, they took them right back out. Honestly, it's gotta be good for ratings to have a few in there where the person absolutely hates it, right? People are interested in genuine reactions, aren't they? Surely not everyone is happy with what they did. Because, yeah, for real, some of those things are just atrocious. Story 12. I volunteered on a site that was renovated by the show School Pride, which lasted 1 season. This show went into rundown public schools and renovated some of their spaces. Noble work, but the condition of the schools was shameful. Never should have gotten that way in the first place. For the first project I helped with, they brought in a bunch of IKEA furniture for a student lounge. It looked cool, and I'm sure it helped their budget go farther, but I wasn't sure if the stuff they chose would hold up real well to a bunch of high school students using it. I haven't been back to know how the school has fared since the renovation, and I'd be thrilled if someone shows up here from there, but any of the students that would have been there when it was new would have graduated by now. Story 13. A family member of mine was on a DIY show called Turf Wars. They basically come in and remodel your and a neighbor's backyard and then have a vote to see who wins the remodel. The show itself was pretty clear cut. They would come in, give a bunch of orders, take some candid shots of work being done, and then hang around letting the owner and contracting crew do the work. The hosts were pretty friendly, but they kind of just gave orders. The voting, though, was kind of a joke. They had people from the neighborhood come and check out the backyards at different times, and one of the yards was inspected in perfect conditions to let the decor shine, and the other was just quickly given a walkthrough. Both of the yards honestly looked great, but the winning house, neighbor, not family member, had been in the neighborhood for a few years, while my family had recently moved in, so weren't well known. The problem was the neighbor had a really large centerpiece to their backyard remodel that was a little impractical for the smallish backyard they had, and there were hardly any covered sitting areas, so if the weather wasn't great, and it's not that great, it wasn't a comfortable area to sit around. You either get baked by the sun or rained on. Less than a year later, the centerpiece was removed and the pond cemented over, as it was too much upkeep, and their backyard fell back to just a cement block. while my family still had the whole backyard set up there as it was much more practical. They kept it until they moved out about 3 or 4 years later. Not sure if it's still around, but would be surprised if it was removed at all. Sounds like your family member was the real winner of that show. Something that is easy to maintain and still looks pretty nice? Yeah, sounds great. A really nice looking backyard takes a lot of work to keep going. I don't blame the other family for having to take stuff out. Story 14. My parents and me as a baby were on a home renovation show called Makeover Wish. You would send in a heartfelt story and they would choose you and come renovate your house for you and leave it a complete surprise. About 6 or 7 years before I was born, I'm 15 now, one of my mother's kidneys were failing. She was in the hospital constantly, got extremely sick, and lost vision in both her eyes. My dad, being the hero he is, decided to donate one of his kidneys. Although it's not too rare for people to donate kidneys nowadays, back then this was a huge deal, and there were several newspaper articles and news broadcasts about their story. My parents ended up winning the Makeover Wish renovation for our house. The episode is actually on YouTube. Search Makeover Wish the Donor. I have a cameo in it. Apart from the master bedroom, everything is pretty much the same, and we've lived here ever since. And I hope to for years to come. You know, for these reality sort of shows, I always worry that the sob stories they make are, manufactured for the sake of the show. And hey, color me surprised. A show that used a sad, touching story that was completely genuine. And they apparently did good work too, because they haven't replaced any of it. So shout out to Makeover Wish, I guess. Story 15. I work for a high-end custom home builder. I've signed NDAs, so I can't say who we've built for, but let's just say we've built for the owners of, Smunder Charmer and the owner of Schmamazon. And even with the type of work we do, where everything is top-notch materials and craftsmanship, we still have to go back year after year to fix things. Houses settle, paint cracks, homeowners drop things on tile floors, etc. And these are houses that take us 3 years at least to build from the ground up or renovate. I can't stand those shows who remodel in like 2 weeks. There's no way to do so without issues down the line. Story 16. You guys complaining about bad fixes? Well, I live in Brazil. When they did this to a house here in my city, not 2 days later the house was entirely robbed. That's what you get for broadcasting on national TV all the expensive electronics you've put in a house from a dangerous neighborhood. Story 17. My sister had her bathroom remodeled for a show. They took 2 back-to-back ancient 1970s style bathrooms and made one giant bathroom with a walk-in, no door shower, and a bathtub that fills from a faucet in the ceiling and marble sinks. They paid for all the materials while the show paid for the design and labor. Still, the show said, "You have to buy these 2 sinks. They're $1,500 each." She did further renovations later, but rents that house out now because they bought a new place. I think the bathroom certainly brought a wow factor from the renters. If it were me, having 2 back-to-back bathrooms with updated fixtures and paint would be worth a lot more than one giant bathroom with a separate walk-in shower, huge 50-gallon tub, and a single toilet, and 2 marble sinks, because practically speaking, only one person can use that at a time, and it feels like you're pooping in a living room or something. It's so big. In any case, I think the renovation certainly added appeal and value to the house for sure. Story 18. I did this 15-ish years ago. Condo in LA. Can't remember the name of the show. They were advertising on Craigslist. The quality of the renovations and furnishings was extremely subpar. They wanted to have everything done within 48 hours. Years later, I've come to understand that remodels take months, not days. We did eventually have to redo everything. Story 19. Not a reno show, but my brother and his roommate were on House Hunters about 4 years ago and loved it. They were the 2 guys in Waco that sounded like straight country bumpkins, although my brother has since lost that accent. His friend was the one actually buying the house, and my brother was just renting from him. But the producers insisted he be a major part of the show and pretended to have big opinions on the house, even though he wasn't buying it, just to make things interesting. After a lot of back and forth, he finally honed in wanting a craftsman-style home. Again, still not even the purchaser, and I think said it 500 times. Still don't think he even knows what that means. They both got paid a couple $100, but had to take a week or so off work. Ended up feeling so uncomfortable that they just drank all day and had fun with it. They also recently had their episode on the show where the comedians roast them, which was pretty fun to watch. Oh, and his roommate already owned the house prior to filming, so it was all bullcrap. Story 20. A local family from my community was on Restaurant Impossible. They ended up going under right after. They would have went out of business regardless, so the renovations didn't matter. I personally knew the family but never went to the restaurant. It just wasn't my type of crowd. I do know they sold the restaurant with all the renovations and it's under a new name. It seems to be thriving, but I haven't been back post-COVID to know if it is still thriving. I just realized how insanely awful would it be to fully remodel or remake your restaurant right before COVID hit. Like, you are not getting returns on that investment for a while. Yikes. Story 21. I was building a very energy-efficient house, and Renovation Nation did a part of an episode about it. They made us out to be heroes for building green in what was then a terrible neighborhood, while the camera panned over to my neighbor's house across the street. He hated me for about 10 years after that. Honestly, there's not much to look at when you build that way, so I think the show was probably pretty boring. We did add solar panels recently, and now the house produces as much energy as it uses. Story 22. Was on a show called The Builders on the BBC in the mid-90s. They were building an extension on the back of our house, but left for 2 weeks unexpectedly halfway through construction. We couldn't get in touch with the builders, and the production crew were very cagey when we asked whether they knew where they were. Found out a few months later when the show aired that they had all buggered off to Tenerife together for a holiday without telling us. We hadn't finished paying them by that point because they still had a few tiny bits and pieces to finish. The sorts of things we could do ourselves if need be, but which they'd agreed to complete before we paid them the final payment. Long story short, we complained and told them to not come back, and ended up getting a third off the price we'd expected to pay for the extension. Story 23. I interned for Extreme Makeover Home Edition in the early 2000s. Yes, their taxes go through the roof. Tons of the families on it end up selling everything that was put into the house, computers, appliances, etc. to help pay the property tax. I worked on 2 houses on set. Then they moved to other parts of California and wouldn't send a free intern there. The first one was in South Central. As we were putting out toys for the kids, someone mentioned that at the last house they did in South Central, everything like what we were putting out was stolen almost immediately. The dad of that family also lost his job because of the mandatory vacation to Disneyland. He tried to work something out with both the production company and his job, but neither would budge. If they wanted the house makeover, he had to leave with his family, so the show could get fun family vacation shots. The other house was in a city about 2 hours outside of LA. The new house was huge. The family did have a lot of kids, and took up most of the lot. I can't even imagine how much their taxes went up. A local band turned famous donated a bunch of merch to the kids, but they couldn't show any of it on air because it didn't benefit ABC, Disney, or Sears. So every time a kid found something band-related, "Ooh, band tickets!" they couldn't use the footage. Wasn't much to reveal after that. Oh, and one of the kids' shared bedrooms was awful. It was something like a country western weird jungle split. Plus, the show gave them an indoor basketball court, but some of the kids still had to share rooms, which didn't make sense to me. The bedrooms all looked pretty cheaply done. I can't imagine they held up. It was an interesting experience. Lots of hidden downsides to these houses, but they really do everything in a week, and some of the designers were truly nice and wanted to help people. Story 24. 2 summers ago, I went on a retreat with some friends and we renovated several homes of poor people for free. New fencing, sidewalks, flooring, cleaning it up, repainting, lots of lawn work. They were really happy about it, and I just hope that they've continued upkeep on the house and didn't let it fall back to where it was before we helped them. I really hope they took advantage of the fresh start we all helped them achieve, and used it to continue to better their lives. Story 25. The place down the block from us was on Restaurant Impossible. They fixed up the interior and it was much better than it was previously. However, they didn't follow his advice on the menu and changed it back to normal almost as soon as the film crew left town. I remember the first time we went there after seeing the show, we were so disappointed to find out the stuff they made a big deal about adding to the menu was not there. Also disappointed that they talked about what the prices of certain things should be, and then those items were not the price they had talked about on the show. They were more expensive. Robert, the show's host, even specifically told the owner to get rid of this one particular item, and you guessed it, it was still there. So basically they didn't follow through on any of the advice, but they got a remodel out of it, I guess. I feel like if someone is really trying to help you and give you good advice for the most part, and then you kind of just spit in their face and change it all back, I don't know, what do you expect to happen? If things weren't working out before, what makes you think reverting to them would do you any better? Strange, man. Story 26. My cousin is a concrete contractor in the upper Midwest. His company was invited to participate in an Extreme Makeover Home Edition renovation for a family several years ago. He was the concrete contractor and poured a slab and footings for a 1,000 square foot addition. A couple of things he noted was that he was required to furnish all labor and materials at no cost to the family or production company. In exchange, he would be rewarded handsomely with exposure. Also, he thought it was weird that Ty Pennington was there on set for about 45 minutes on day 1 and about 30 minutes on the last day. In the interim, nowhere to be seen. So the production team does some seriously creative editing to make it look like Ty is there all week. Story 27. Father-in-law is a contractor. His team helped with a build for a home makeover show shooting in Las Vegas. He said they were told to work fast and cheap, which throws quality out the window. There would also be moments where the crew would finish something and then the producers would bring in the volunteers to hammer the last nail and act like they did the project. My husband remembers being in the crowd for the big reveal when the family drives up. He said they did it over and over and over again, to the point where even the family didn't look excited for their new home. Story 28. I was technically on the final episode of Extreme Makeover Home Edition, where they did 7 homes in 7 days in Joplin after the tornado. You could only see my back and I had a blanket over me because it was cold that night. My stepdad worked for the disposal company that took care of trash and whatnot, and my mom and sister actually volunteered to go in and help clean up the houses. My grandpa volunteered as well. Ty Pennington came right up to my grandma and talked with us for a bit, and she said it was cold, so he gave us a group hug. According to my stepdad, however, the 7 homes they brought in were prefabricated, apparently, and they just basically finished them up. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, or how the owners are doing since I don't live in Joplin anymore. Story 29. My dad's favorite shows are the flipping houses and the bad renovation ones. One afternoon, I was watching them with him, and I want to say Flip This House was on. Then a bit later, I think Homes on Homes came on. Mike Holmes criticized the house and said how shoddy the work was, and we hit this eureka moment. Holmes was fixing the flipped house from the last show. I wish I could remember which episodes these were. I can't even remember if it was really Flip This House, but I'm confident it was Homes on Homes who fixed it. Story 30. I used to work for a home healthcare agency where we'd send in PSWs and nurses to take care of people. By the way, most people were abusing the system as it was free, and people pretended they couldn't do their laundry or would hide paper clips around the house to make sure the PSW was cleaning, even though they weren't supposed to anyway. Had a client's family get one of those elevators installed by that Mike Holmes guy for their disabled daughter. Right after they put in the elevator, for free, the family sued the show for putting in the wrong type of elevator. They wanted millions for it. Made me realize how many crappy people there are getting free crap only to complain more. Story 31. Me and my brother wanted to surprise our parents for their anniversary, and as it so happened, producers from a show were visiting the movie theater we work at. We signed up, sent in our touching video submission about why our parents deserve this opportunity, and fast forward to a few days later, we find out we're the winners. All we have to do is keep the parents out of the house for a few hours while they work their magic. Eventually, we come home, super stoked for our parents to see their surprise, and we open the door, and god damn it, they stole everything. The police did track them down, and we learned these scumbags have been running this scheme for a while now. They found our stuff, so our house is back to normal now, so overall just a waste of time. Story 32. There was this construction company that did a yearly challenge where they would attempt to make an entire neighborhood in 12 hours or something like that. It was extolled as a masterpiece of planning and coordination. In reality, the houses were assembled horribly. Sewage backups were common. Severe foundation cracking within the first year was pretty much guaranteed. They used special quickset cement and then further encouraged it to speed up in various ways, and just all sorts of horror. Story 33. I was indirectly involved with a bar that was on Bar Rescue, the highest rated episode of the series, no less. Nearly all of the renovation was done horribly. None of the things that really needed fixing, refrigerator repairs, HVAC repairs, water damaged, ceiling repairs, were done at all, because those don't look good or interesting to an audience. Basically, if it wasn't in the camera frame of the final edit, it didn't get touched. Against the wishes of the owner, they completely changed the bar's theme to the laziest thing I've ever heard of, and because they had existing contracts to host parties with old themes, it was nearly all reverted at the owner's expense the day after filming wrapped. They did manage to make a little money by selling the automatic beer dispensing machines that were at the time illegal to use in that county. The bar stayed in business for about a year or two after the renovation, but it finally went bust, and the owner went on to open a restaurant in another state. Story 34. My house wasn't on one, but the house 2 houses down from me was featured on the show Zombie Flippers on its 2nd season, I think. House is still holding up and looks nice, although I believe most of that was the work of the previous owner after he bought and spent 2 years fixing it up, only for him to rent it out to the crappiest people I've ever had the displeasure of sharing oxygen with. They said they embellished a lot of stuff in the actual episode, having a baby alligator planted in the house because LOL Florida, or putting a large tree branch on the roof because LOL hurricanes, and their construction taking longer than the 6 weeks they claimed in the episode. It was like 4 months. Granted, I believe a lot of that time, though, was just spent rewiring the electricity for the house. It is hysterical to me that some producer out there was like, there's not enough drama in this house remodeling show. What do we need? An alligator. It is Florida after all. Story 35. We tried to get on a show a few years ago. America's Most Desperate Kitchen or something like that. Two brothers from Jersey on HGTV. Sent an audition video, all that. Rep for them basically said our kitchen was too much. Our home is 110 years old, and the kitchen hasn't been updated since pre-World War II. The walls are ugly tile, cabinets are metal, sink is a porcelain tub. They wanted a quick flip, not a gut job. Story 36. My uncles were on one of the shows, but they were criticized as another person came to clean up their mess. It turned out that they kept trying to do their jobs, but the owner kept changing plans on them and asking for things that weren't safe. Eventually, they quit because they weren't going to go against building or electrical code, cut their losses, and left. They even offered to put things back, but the owner just wouldn't let them. By the time the other person got there were half-finished renovations and they got blasted pretty hard on national TV. It didn't hurt their business because they had so many loyal clients and a 2-year waitlist for major projects, but it still makes them angry 10 years later. They think the owner did it intentionally to get featured on TV, and he had an in for cheaper repairs. Another family friend of ours was on one of the buying shows like House Hunters. They were told to lie about their jobs and had actually purchased the home before it started, and had to pick the house they had already bought on their budgets. Story 37. I was on a remodel show. The theme was laundry makeover in 48 hours. 2 different houses with different laundry room layouts, 2 different designers. Our designer was also the person doing all of the construction work. She had good ideas and was very ambitious for the short time frame. They had us help. My wife and I were working pretty much dawn until 1 a.m. both days. I was exhausted and had some complaints about the extremely poor workmanship and shortcuts they were taking. They acted like I was some jerk because of it. They also cut a drywall out and soffit as part of their idea, and had electrical in the way they didn't expect. I had to hire an electrician that my contractor knew to reroute the wires and install new lights. And we negotiated they do it free of charge for credits on the show. After production, they never credited the electrician and pretended they didn't know anything after I called them out on it. Had to have drywall person fix stuff, carpenter had to finish the wood accent wall, they only did the part of the wall that was in view of the camera, had to have painters finishing painting, etc. Was, quote-unquote, free, but cost me more money and work to finish it the right way. Story 38. Not a home, but a school renovation done by the Extreme Home Makeover crew. Questionable paint color choices on the exterior of our buildings. They repainted a few of the classrooms and a lot of the paint didn't actually go all the way up to the edge/ceiling. You could see roller marks. They replaced some furniture, such as desks, and installed those smart boards. They redid the quad on campus that was a large patch of dirt into one with ponds and tiles. It was cool, but hard to maintain. As everyone mentioned in their experiences, they did a half-assed job. It's like that meme of Homer Simpson looking fit, but he's holding back his skin with a bunch of large clips. Yeah, generally for TV, if there's something they don't show, there's a reason they don't show it. After all, why would they hide anything they did a good job of? Story 39. My family was on Extreme Makeover Home Edition. The house actually held up pretty well, but all of the themed rooms obviously aged poorly. But hey, free house. The worst part was that for months after the show ended, we would occasionally find Ty Pennington, the host of the show, wandering around our yard or harassing our neighbors, trying to talk to them about the house, absolutely hammered. It was a pretty sad situation to see, and once he got into the kitchen through the garage because I forgot to lock the door after school. It was genuinely scary. We even considered moving. OP, is this real? Are you serious about this? You're telling me Ty Pennington was drunk out of his mind, wandering around your property and then broke in once? Or I guess let himself in. But still, if this is real, I have concerns. Story 40. I wasn't part of the show, but I work in a casino where the people stayed while renovating a hotel nearby. I say renovating because that's what the show claimed to do. After speaking with a few of the cast members on the show as well as some of the hotel workers, we found out they did a singular room, and then left the owners of the hotel with the means to order the same stuff used in the renovation that they did for just the one room. As far as I know, they never did order the stuff. It was a small hotel not connected to any major chain, so I doubt they had the funds to do a major renovation. Story 41. Some friends of mine were on tattoo rescue some years back. They owned 2 tattoo shops. One was just in a bad spot where they weren't going to get a lot of traffic no matter what they did. The show made this huge deal out of one of their apprentices, and how he was good enough to graduate out of apprenticeship then and there. And then there was this huge bullcrap group therapy session where they squared it all away. So like half the show wasn't even about the renovation the show was supposed to be about. And as for the renovation, they did about 10% better than screw all. The front reception area of the shop was huge. Honestly, the shop was freaking barn-sized space, and only about 40% of it was tattoo stations. And in truth, for the volume they were doing, even that was ridiculous. So they installed a fancy new cut metal tattoo sign inside the shop where it couldn't be seen from the street, LEDs and all. They convinced my friends to put in a rack for tattoo clothes, which basically meant promiscuous cheap dresses and t-shirts. and they redid the front awning. The show was just dumb. It was more about having drama in the shop than it was about actually helping them. My friends basically just hoped that the show would work as free advertising, and it did for a short while, but the show wasn't all that popular in the first place, so it was very short-lived and mostly pointless. Story 42. Extreme Makeover came to our area and redid a fire station and I think a local high school that was screwed up during Hurricane Rita. My brother is a firefighter and also well-versed in construction. He said the fire station was not functional at all. Half the sinks weren't even hooked up right, light switches and plugs were just attached to the wall and non-functioning, and they couldn't even use the station at first because the fire alarm system didn't work, and the building itself wasn't up to fire code. The high school was just as bad. Story 43. A few years back I lived in a house, just rented a room, that was made over by Apartment Therapy for a makeover video series they did. And it was awesome. They brought in like $8,000 worth of new, high-quality furniture, some awesome rugs, and plants. It went from a kind of sparse living room to a super swanky place. I loved it for the next 6-ish months I lived there, but moved out a while later. I think Apartment Therapy isn't really trying to manufacture drama in the way reality TV is, and there was no construction or painting to half-ass. The designers were really polite and chill. 10 out of 10 would recommend getting made over by them. Story 44. My parents worked as volunteers on Restaurant Impossible at a local restaurant. Apparently, anyone can sign up online to be one of the workers during renovation, and there's a group of workers who travel the country to work on different episodes. Anyway, my stepdad was out in charge of hanging tile behind the host stand at a restaurant, and the tiles were poorly installed and started peeling away from the wall the day after it was put up. They told me that the quality of the materials was very poor and haphazardly put together. They also said that Robert Irvine was very friendly in between takes. However, when they were ready to film a scene, they would direct Robert Irvine to a specific area of the restaurant work in progress, and once the camera started rolling, he would jump around and scream at the workers. Then, when the cameras shut off, he was back to acting casually. Story 45. Not on the show personally, but we were the buyers of a home that was renovated on HGTV. I believe the show has since been cancelled. List It Sisters or something of the like. We were buying in a competitive market, which is my only excuse as to why we had such blinders for such obvious faults. For one, they took the easy route rather than the proper route on several different occasions. The large den is believed to be a garage originally due to the concrete subfloor and 2 steps lower than the main floor. When they laid the laminate wood floor, no pad was laid between the two, so if you fall down those steps, it's a straight blow to concrete. Other things, like all our hot and cold waters, come out opposite of the normal. Cold is left and hot is right. And the shower head and faucet aren't centered. Especially the tub faucet, it's at least 6 inches off. The kitchen floor was laid with cheap tile, currently using duct tape on 2 areas. Not to mention the grout was never sealed. Painted over the baseboards and door frames without sanding, or filling in any holes/patching. Sloppy drywall seamwork, I could go on. Some of it is more than aggravating, it's actually scary. The electrical job on the updated light fixture and installation of fans was honestly dangerous. Lighting plates secured with 1 screw, overloading electrical outlet connection, it's a bit shocking. We love our location and neighborhood, so it's just something we deal with and fix/correct when we can. Luckily, nothing that has cost us significantly financially. But I also won't buy another house that's been renovated on TV. OP, did you mean to say a bit shocking as a pun when talking about overloading electrical outlet connections and lighting plates with 1 screw? Because you don't address the pun. But I do want to point out, it's incredible, like 10 out of 10 work. Wordplay aside, though, I kind of understand if a house isn't, like, totally complete or up to certain standards because they want to fast-track it for TV or whatever. That's kind of expected. I'm not saying it's right, but expected. Outright dangerous stuff, though? Yeah, that shouldn't be flying in any situation. Story 46. A house around the corner from my mom's work was on Extreme Home Makeover a while ago. The show used a conference room in my mom's work to do the interviews. The house looked great, but it just didn't fit in with the neighborhood. The surrounding houses are nice ranch-style single homes that sell for around $200 to $250K. This house is easily twice as big as all the other homes. It's 2 stories, and because of how big it is, it actually has less land. I heard from someone who knew the family that within a year, fixtures were starting to become loose. They had a ton of plumbing issues, and I believe they had foundational issues within 2 years. When the family put it up for sale a few years later, they couldn't afford the new property taxes. It was listed for $750K. No one in their right mind would pay that much to live in that neighborhood. I believe they did eventually sell it, but for much less than anticipated. Story 47. Not me, but family in my hometown had their home completely rebuilt back in 2009 on Extreme Home Makeover. It was a very poor family with multiple children with special needs ranging from autism to being in a wheelchair with severe mental disabilities. Their oldest son had no disabilities and was really into sports. Their home was condemned, so it was completely torn down and rebuilt. Additionally, the family was given a brand new car. They built a home gym for the oldest son full of weights, and the local grocery store chain gave them a year's supply of groceries. Within a year, the car they had been given had been sold and replaced with 2 cars, one of which barely ran and the other was on cinder blocks the day they bought it. The gym equipment had been sold, and the mom had been arrested for stealing from the local Walmart. Drove past their house early this year and it looks like a crap hole due to how poorly the family cared for it. I have no idea if they still live there. Story 48. I am the homeowner of the Mad Scientist Monster House. It was a fun experience, but weird. But then again, you don't go on Monster House if you don't appreciate weird. Okay, so where to start? Everything has broken, or was so jerry-rigged for television as to be unusable. The smart home tech was of the vintage kind where those plug-in wall modules just failed. The programming was also awful with conflicting scenes and really not a lot of guidance. To Smart Home's credit, when I contacted them years later after things just started crapping out, they sent a guy to my house to replace and reprogram everything, so hey, go them. The electric chair was not something anyone would ever want to sit in for any length of time. I gave that to some friends who I think turned it into some mutant vehicle for Wasteland Weekend, or turned it into a set piece in their post-apocalyptic desert camping adventure. The alcohol dispenser would leak after every shot dispensed, and it required significant PM to ensure the lines didn't get gross. I eventually removed it and used speed pours on my bottles. The huge freaking metal sliding door is and always has been a pain in the neck. It has no handles and slides about as well as a sliding door that's off its track. It also blocks an electrical outlet when it's open all the way, and as such has wrecked more than one plug over the years, as people don't understand that and try to slide the door all the way open. And I mean, hey, why would they? The whole thing is a beast to move one way or the other. The way that all those flashing lights and fiber optics were controlled was that someone modified a power strip and wired things into it, and it was then plugged into a smart home module, which means when I reached up there to sort something out, I got a nice little 120 volt surprise. The Pergo floor that looks like stone and may indeed be bulletproof is fine. The Toxic Tavern neon sign occasionally decided to work, but there was always some conflict with Smart Home's switch that controlled it, and eventually I just stopped caring. The issue with shows like Monster House that have a 1-week competitive turnaround time is that they're relegated to building things that they build like movie sets, often by carpenters who build movie sets. I suspect it's because Original Productions is based in Burbank, movie studio land, and the only people insane enough to do something like this are folks used to working under deadlines like this. To their credit, they have crews of professional builders dive right in after the team build deadline is over, to essentially take everything apart that needs to be rebuilt, and make sure the place doesn't fall apart immediately. It just, takes a few years. It is all for the best, I suppose. It's now more than 15 years later, and I'm about sick enough of living in a dark and gloomy cave that I'm planning the D model. Story 50. As a kid, there was a family a street over who had their house done by the Changing Rooms guys. Oh, I had the maddest crush on Carol Smillie. Dropped around the street to try and see it a few times, but it was mainly sectioned off. Anyway, they did a loft conversion for the 2 young lads in the house, which looked amazing on the TV. However, no one bothered to check the legal small print, and the work they carried out actually required planning approval, which was eventually denied. As far as I know, the show team put the room back to near enough the way it was, and that was the end of that. Sucked to be that family, though, because the whole town gossiped about it and probably had a right good laugh. I know my mum did. Story 52. 10 plus years ago, my family's house got a kitchen remodel on a show that I'm pretty sure was called Spice Up My Kitchen. Before the remodel, the whole kitchen and most of the house was pink, something from the previous owners. They put some new tile in and some new appliances, and it looked great. I don't remember much else about it because I was 4 when it happened. We moved out about 6 years ago, so I don't know what the house looks like now because I haven't been there since 2014. Story 53. My old watering hole was in Bar Rescue. When I was barely of age, this place was poppin', packed house every night. But over the years, customers stopped coming and the bar needed some serious help to get it back up and running again. I was excited. I assumed after the rescue, things would go back to the way they used to be, but no. After the remodel, we went in and stayed for only 1 drink. Despite a few fresh pieces of furniture, the place was dead. Don't think it really recovered after that. I hate to say it, but no amount of new furniture and remodeling can replace the vibes. Sorry you lost your favorite place, OP. Or at least your old favorite place. Story 54. So I had a stepsister and her husband have their kitchen done on renovation raiders. There's one really big screw up and two minor goofs. The big one is that the wood floor was improperly installed. Due to time constraints, they did a floating floor rather than traditional nails. There's nothing really wrong with the floating floor, but you need to leave gaps between the wall and the floor underneath the baseboards so the floor can expand as the heat and humidity increases. This goes double with a floor installed in a northern climate in the middle of winter. So every summer the wood would start to wedge its way upwards in the middle of the floor. They joked about being sure to sell the house in the winter, and hey, they did in fact do so. The minor goofs were no one remembered to / had the time to replace the light over the sink, which now looked really cheap and dated relative to the rest of the kitchen. And there was never a proper doorstop on the door to the garage, so the previous residents had bashed a hole in the drywall with the doorknob, then fixed it with a metal plate like you would use to hide plumbing access holes. RR fixed it properly when they did the drywall, but then after it was all fixed and painted, a crew member rushed into the house and punched a new hole and they had no time to redo it, so they put the plate back on. Story 55. Not a remodel show, but a home show where they look at several homes and then decide. My friends were on it. They had already purchased the house and started moving in. One of the other houses that ticked more of their boxes and seems like the obvious choice based on their wish list wasn't actually for sale. Producers approached the people living there, which we assume was because it matched their wish list and nothing on the market did. And the other house was a new build, not done. They literally just laid carpet down but didn't install it. They got a tiny bit of money, their realtor was paid nothing for his time, and it was super staged and pretty scripted. Story 56. When we were looking at homes a few years ago, we looked at a home that was built for a show that starred Tim Tebow and the Holmes guy. In fact, all the homes on that street were built by the show. It was actually a beautiful house, but there were some major build quality issues. I remember looking at a second-level foyer wall and it was bowing out, and you could see where instead of using a sheet of drywall, they plastered the whole thing, and it looked awful up close. There was also this gigantic mural in the living room that spanned 2 stories, and there was no way to remove it without destroying the wall. The kitchen looked nice, but something was screwed up with the finish of the sink. I've thought about tracking down the episode where they reveal/review the house we saw, but I'm just lazy. Story 57. I know someone who is the star of an episode of Military Makeover on Lifetime. This was a year or 2 ago. They completely gutted his house and started from scratch. I never watched the episode, but a few weeks after the crew left, water started leaking into the basement each time it rained. He needed help digging a trench around his house, and there were a few other issues. I should ask him how his house is holding up now that I think of it. Suddenly curious. Story 58. I was interviewed for a show a few months ago. It was supposedly about homesteading, but turned out in the interview to be more of a home makeover show than anything else. My partner and I were kind of surprised to be asked what we would be spending on the house when the whole point of our move was to cut the cost of our living and live off the land. We were excited to share our plans for the homestead, not what style siding we would choose for a house that already works. Apparently our answers, budget, and persona weren't that HGTV quality. Never got a call back, and happier for it. We did just get a new roof, and are in the middle of a sick DIY kitchen remodel from entirely salvaged materials, so hey, their loss. Story 59. A restaurant owned by a friend's family was featured on one of Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmare type shows. They had this garbage family feud story that was completely made up, and the terrible staged undercover scene. They never used bad food or had any health code violations. I'd think agreeing to have that televised would have been incredibly humiliating in such a small town. It was true that the owner was on hard times after taking it over from his parents, but that was more his inability to run a business. The restaurant always had steady customers, especially during the weekends. The restaurant would be packed. Anyway, they renovated the interior to be more upscale, but it looked like a hotel restaurant. Took away any old charm and replaced it with crap you'd find at TJ Maxx or Target. They updated the menu and took off pretty much anything that kept the customers coming back, and nothing was affordable afterwards, which is important in a small town business. It lasted a few months before they had to file for Protection Chapter 11 bankruptcy, and then COVID hit and they switched it to full liquidation Chapter 7 bankruptcy. They didn't last 6 months after the episode aired. Story 60. I did some redesigns for Bar Rescue back in the day. Got called to the bar on a Friday on Labor Day weekend. Told them it was probably the worst time to remodel a bar given everything was closed and wouldn't open up until Tuesday. Well, didn't matter. They needed it done. I called my buddy who runs a print shop and asked if he could do all the prints over the weekend, and he agreed. Anyway, I got my part of the job done, but apparently nobody on the show bothered with permits for the city. Several months later, the bar was basically in limbo. Couldn't operate without its permit, and it closed its doors. It was a very popular club/bar right next to ASU. Story 61. I once worked for a local ABC affiliate, and was given some access to one of the extreme makeover homes. Totally raised the house like always, installed some weird modifications for an older lady that turned out didn't even live there, built this bizarre backyard playground that any realtor would see and say, yeah, screw this, and leave. Turns out the family lied about quite a bit to get the house. Couple was already divorced. Only one person even lived in the house before it was redone. It came out soon after the reveal that their plan was to get a new house for the sole reason to sell it off. Their neighbors had a lot to say. Needless to say, we did not play up the episode when it finally aired. By the way, I was there for the infamous door knock with Ty Pennington, which was actually done twice. Once for real and another time for the show. Little known fact, for every family that gets the knock, there are 2 other families who get a phone call telling them they didn't win. Story 62. There's a house in my city that was on extreme makeovers. It's in shambles, and the family wasn't able to keep up with the cost of it from what I heard. It's a bummer. Similarly, a friend of mine was hired to be a handyman on a reno for another similar show doing an episode in our city. He was hired because he's handsome and somewhat handy, but in no way a pro. Most of the work was done for him, and they would film him just doing a few cuts or nails or whatever. This sucks. I know it's been mentioned before in this thread, but hearing about people not being able to pay the new taxes on their property that was just redone, sure, you could say they should have looked into that beforehand or sold it faster, whatever, but these are now people who have to deal with relocating because they've lost all their money because their house got upgraded. Like, yeah, it just sounds awful to me. Story 63. I live in the town for that new HGTV show, Hometown. They did up this downtown house real fancy. 2 doors down from the last house they did, but that's a different story. And about a week after the episode aired, a fat loblolly branch subjected the damn thing. Family just abandoned it. It's still just sitting there in that swanky neighborhood with a big old blue tarp plastered over the roof. I had no idea what a loblolly is. Should I have figured it out from the word branch afterwards? Perhaps. But in case you are also confused, I looked it up. It's a tree. A tree branch fell on the house. Unlucky. Story 64. My cousin works for some contractors in upstate New York. They did a home for one of the HGTV shows. She told me the producers told them to do it quick and cheap. And so they did, needing the money. 6 months later, they got called back to the house by the owner. The place was falling apart. All the cheap work they did was failing, and she expected that. Of course, they fixed what they could, and the owner paid them out of pocket to do so. And as you would expect, the owner signed an NDA, and so did my cousin's boss. But she, my cousin, didn't. And to add, one of the producers made racist comments about some of the black and Hispanic workers, and also just straight up told my cousin's boss, "Why do you hire those trans freaks?" Referring to my cousin. She's 5'10", built like an ox with full-arm tattoo sleeves, short hair, and a nose ring. Holy crap, this person really went full into it, huh? Like, first of all, cousin's boss just self-reported himself that he's too fragile in his masculinity to see a woman who is stronger than him. And also just being bigoted doesn't help either, huh? That was a spicy end to that story. My god. Story 65. We did an HGTV show 8 years ago. Indoors Out. The premise was a little different than many of the shows back then. Nothing was free, and the way you competed to get on the show was to submit a proposal, including design documents and a budget. The advertised benefit was that everything was going to be completed in a 3-day shooting schedule. I heard nothing for months and then received a call. Can you get permits, have electrical work done, and be ready to go in 30 days? We did. Also, with the permission of the producers, we contracted a range of suppliers to get equipment and materials at a reduced price in exchange for a mention in the show. The producer also hired the builders, gardens, etc. to do the work. The hosts came the day before shooting to survey the situation, and one contractor came to dig 4-foot-deep footings, which were covered with plywood and turf. The morning of the shoot started with the hosts scanning our backyard and proposing that they do certain things, all of which were in my design. And starting that day, we filmed the opening, and then we got 10 inches of rain that turned everything into a muddy mess, as 20 people attempted to begin work. Also, the holes dug for the deck footers were filled with muddy water, and we had to rent an industrial pump to empty them. Work resumed on day 2, and everything was largely completed in the next 2 days. A 15 by 20 Trex raised deck, a 20 by 29 paver patio with an outdoor kitchen and a steel and aluminum patio cover, trees, gardens, and a 5-foot Italian urn water feature. We got $10,000 in donated materials, furniture, accent lighting for the entire backyard, and an underground mosquito spraying system. The hosts were stonemasons, and on the fly, they converted part of my design plan, which they found cheesy, well, because it was, into something that better met my design goals. That is what happens when you deal with principled pros. Dean and Derek. Everything is still there, and we use it all the time. Story 67. In the early 2000s, I worked on a few episodes of Trading Spaces as a production assistant. In one house, we did a kitchen that featured a backsplash made of broken glass. The grout did not fully fill the cracks, so this family with small children literally had shards of glass with sharp edges on the walls. We also spray painted the dishwasher black and it started chipping off almost immediately. But they framed it so it looked nice for TV and we pieced out. I mean, I was a college student studying television production and they handed me a drill and told me to remove the hardware from all the cabinets. I had never touched a drill before. I had also never painted entire walls of a home before, but Trading Spaces changed all of that. To be fair though, the premise of the show was only having 2 days and a budget of $1,000, or something like that, and production stuck to that concept, so you get what you signed up for. Story 68. My husband and I were on a short-lived home/yard TLC show called Take Home Handyman, with host Andrew Dan Jumbo. He and his crew were fun, worked hard, and really did a great job. Granted, the work they did was simple in our home and yard, and the host and his crew did great work and stayed long into the evening to get it completed for us too. And Andrew taught us techniques. They added some backyard and indoor touches, and fixed other odds and ends. That said, the wine rack wasn't our favorite, but Andrew did such a good job it took us forever to get it out of the house. When we removed it from the wall, it took a huge chunk of plaster from our wall, but that was our fault. At the beginning of the episode, like a lot of these kinds of shows, they act like you were picked out of a crowd of shoppers from a home improvement store. In reality, we applied to be on the show and were interviewed before they approved us. Logistically, it makes sense. Can't expect these folks to get required permits in the same week they do the work. It was a great experience. Andrew was so kind and funny, and his crew were very respectful and fun. We'd do it again in a heartbeat.